That's pretty 90% of what we deal with. So part of the philosophy here is the good, the enemy of the best. Now there are good data to say that oxytocin is a really good drug, and oxytocin works. Oxytocin is a drug that contracts the uterus. It's what's actually produced in the posterior pituitary gland, which then gets secreted into the circulation and causes the uterus to contract. It's what starts labor. So when a woman is actually in labor, she's producing oxytocin in her body, and that causes labor and eventually delivery. But we've also got it in a bottle. The biggest problem with oxytocin, and this is where the good is not the enemy of the best comes in, the biggest problem with oxytocin is that it can't just be, there's no pill, number one. It has to be given either by injection into the muscle or by IV instillation. That requires, by itself, a lot of accessories. So you have to have the accessories available to give the injection or to put it in the IV, number one. Number two, oxytocin has to be refrigerated. It has to be kept cold or it won't work. So that creates a cold chain issue, which when we get pretty far out into the setting of labor and delivery in developing countries, everybody doesn't have a fridge. Even sometimes district hospitals may not have some place to keep something cold. So having something that's cheap, is heat stable, and can be taken by mouth or by other routes, as I've shown you, can be very useful. The real question comes, how useful does it have to be recommended? And again, here's where you have a lot of trade-offs, people saying, well, the oxytocin is the best drug. It should be the one we should always be using. And some of us keep saying, but what if it's not there? Then what should we use? Okay, we give you that. Oxytocin is a great drug. If we had it, we would use it. But we all know that in most cases, in many cases, we don't have it, so we can't use it. So, and there are two components here to when and where you use it. One is for prevention of postpartum hemorrhage, which by itself accounts for, on average, 30% of maternal death. If you could just eliminate postpartum hemorrhage, you could reduce maternal deaths by 30% in almost every developing country setting. That's a pretty take-it-to-the-bank figure. Another pretty take-it-to-the-bank figure is that abortion will account for another 15 to 20% of maternal death. So those two together those are preventable deaths with relatively easy things you can do to prevent them. And giving misoprostol to prevent postpartum hemorrhage or to treat it are two approaches that have been actively investigated in the last few years. This one happens to be a very recently published research looking at treatment. And the reason I'm showing you this is partly because there's another sort of yin-yang that's going on in the field is where should we be putting our efforts? Into prevention, so misoprostol in every pot, or misoprostol just when we think it's indicated. And that's really still a much debated term. The more we find out about treatment, we may find out that we may want to shift away from misoprostol for everyone and do more selected misoprostol. But even that could be socially marketed and provided to people as soon as, even at a home birth, they've discovered you've bled more than X. You've soaked 2 Kangas, or 2 of this, or 2 of that. Give the misoprostol. So this study really looked at that kind of scenario where they had women either taking 800 micrograms sublingual misoprostol, so again, easy access, under the tongue, pretty quick serum levels, or 40 units of IV oxytocin. And obviously the group that's not included here, but is in the back of our minds, is the group for whom no oxytocin is available, really. Okay? Next, please. Now, wait. And so just to show you, this is a study which was conducted in these 6 countries. No, 5 countries. Okay? Next. And here's what it shows. And there were 2 kind of settings for this. One setting was, let's pretend that we have oxytocin all the time. It's always available. But it doesn't always work, because even if you give something for prevention, it may not prevent what it is you're trying to prevent. The same thing is true for is for misoprostol. May not prevent what you're trying to prevent. So then you have to have a plan B. So in this case, they assumed, okay, everybody gets gets oxytocin, and if it doesn't work, the oxytocin doesn't work, the woman still has hemorrhage, then we're going to give either misoprostol or more oxytocin. And in this case, you can see that they worked about the same. And they were specifically interested in looking at how long did it take the bleeding to stop. And you can see here about at the bottom, in each case, it took about 19 minutes for the bleeding to stop. But the result here was about the same. So as second line, if you had oxytocin in the first place, but you don't have very much, you could use misoprostol as your second line, cheap, efficacious, and available to treat postpartum hemorrhage, and you get the same result as if you'd used up more oxytocin. In this case, where there was no oxytocin, so we're pretending we're in a setting where no oxytocin is available for prevention, because we don't want to waste the oxytocin on everybody. But now we've got a situation where we've diagnosed postpartum hemorrhage. Now we're going to give oxytocin or misoprostol. And what you can see here is there was a 5% difference in terms of the number of women who either continued to bleed beyond 20 minutes or for whom additional measures had to be undertaken. But it's 5%, essentially. And in this case, you can see that the oxytocin stopped the bleeding in 11 minutes,